Hello, my name is Aidan Lonergan and I'm the character creation tutor here at Escape Studios. In today's video, we're going to be looking at how we can sculpt the eye area as part of our facial sculpting series. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So as usual, when we start with any kind of sculpting project, I have some references up. These references again are from Anatomy for Sculptors, a really useful guide for all range of artists. Again, if you're beginner, intermediate, pro, expert, I recommend always working with references, especially if you're trying to capture, humans, life, form, all these types of things. It's important that we are basing our work in realism rather than our imagination. So we have those, and again, I've just got, in this case, just a default cube that I'm going to start with. So at the moment, the cube has subdivision levels. So if we go to geometry, you can see there I have 5 levels of subdivision. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce that, because at this moment we're not really needing subdivision levels to work. Again, we're just worrying about the primary forms, and in the primary form stage, I don't have to be concerned when it comes to topology. That's a later stage, kind of after you've done UVs and so forth. So I'm just going to reduce the subdivisions down to level 1, and then I'm going to delete higher. At the moment, if I was now to look at the wireframe and the mesh, it's really low. So I'm going to just increase it, and to do this I'm going to use Dynamesh. So under the Geometry tab we can use Dynamesh, and I'm just going to use a resolution of 32, and there we go. Cool. What you can do is we can start by just softening and smoothing these edges a little bit. And we can also kind of just resize our cube a little bit. So just make it a little bit smaller and maybe a little bit bigger, just to give ourselves more working area. Again, it's always easier to take away space than it is to add space. So always start kind of wider, and then we can kind of chip away. Cool. With that done, I'm going to leave symmetry on for now. Later we're going to turn symmetry off when we're working with the eye area itself. But I'm going to be using, you can use the standard brush, but I'm going to use clay buildup, which again is BCB, and that's going to allow me to essentially carve in the eye socket, or the orbital as we call it. So kind of using a relatively sized big brush, I'm going to hold Alt to invert it. Essentially we're just going to kind of carve in an eye socket. Again, don't worry about how deep it goes, but now what I can do is just holding Shift, just kind of smooth that slightly. Again, in these early stages, just make sure that we don't over smooth, otherwise we can kind of lose the details and forms that we're trying to add, so it's important that we try and keep those. Nice. I'm now going to build up the orbital fat. So again, if we look at this reference here, you can see that part of the skull, obviously we have the eye sockets, but we have fat that builds up around it. So imagine this is kind of the skull eye socket. I'm now going to just use my clay build-up brush and just kind of build up that mass around it. Again, I might use a slightly bigger brush for this actually, just like so. Again, building this up, and then we can smooth that back. Nice. Perfect. Unlike the other videos in this tutorial series, we're going to make use of multiple subtools. And the reason for this is to mimic real life, right? The idea that our eyeballs are separate from our face. So the way we can achieve this is by using multiple subtools. So what I'm going to do here is, under my subtool palette, I'm going to append, and I'm going to append a sphere, right? Essentially that is the closest kind of primitive object to the shape of our eyeballs. Usually your eyeballs are spherical. However, if you have a astigmatism, they are slightly a little bit more kind of rugby ball or oval shaped. But for the sense of this tutorial, and just to keep kind of things a bit more simplified, we're just going to leave it as a sphere. One small quirk about ZBrush: when you append a subtool, it doesn't automatically select it. So you can see here I'm actually still got the cube selected. So just make sure that you select the sphere. A shortcut for jumping between subtools is just to hold Alt, and you can see I can kind of jump between the cube and the sphere. Nice and easy. With the sphere selected, I'm going to press Shift F to see the wireframe, and I'm also just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Again, you can hold Shift to snap to 5-degree increments. So the reason for that is so the pole of the sphere is facing forwards, which just makes it easier when it comes to, say, maybe sculpting the actual eye. But obviously in this video, we're more looking at kind of the general eye area and the shapes and the forms of the eyelids, rather than building up the iris and the cornea and the elements of the eye itself. We can bring it forward a little bit, so we can use transparency just to see how big our eye is, and we can kind of scale it down and bring it a little bit forwards. So we can kind of nestle it in our eye socket there. Again, maybe a little bit further. And then I can turn transparency off. Cool. Different artists have different ways of sculpting eyelids. I'm going to approach them using the eyeball and an extraction method, but you could also just sculpt them. So just to show you an alternative approach would be on your cube, you can kind of use clay buildup. You may want to do this without symmetry, so just press X to turn off symmetry. And then you can essentially just kind of build up mass on top. Again, it would be a case of smoothing it back and dynameshing to redistribute the faces, but you can kind of just sculpt on that mesh and build it up. Again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Sculpting is a lot of finding the method that works for you. The method that I find that works for me and gives me a little bit more control about the shape of the eyelids is to extract them from the eyeball itself. What I would recommend, just a side tangent here, if you're working with multiple subtools, it's a good habit to name them, right? Otherwise what happens is if your subtool stack builds up and they have kind of these default names like PM 3D, Sphere 3D1, that doesn't really give you an idea of what that mesh is and why you made it. So in my subtool stack, I'm just going to rename. So we can obviously call this kind of maybe the face for our cube, although it's not the entire face, but obviously it's the mesh that's kind of being built around the eyelids. And obviously our sphere is going to be our eyeball. So again, we can just rename this to eyeball. Lovely. So with my eyeball mesh selected, and I'm going to go into the orthographic mode here. I'm going to use a mask. So I'm going to hold Control and change it from the mask pen to the mask lasso. And essentially I'm going to be able to draw an eyelid shape that I want. Again, if we look at our references here, we can see that the eyelids have kind of this strong diagonal shape. Again, a lot of the body loves diagonals. So the idea that we can see the highest point of the upper eyelid is kind of more towards the medium or the middle of the body or the head. And the bottom eyelid, the lowest point, is actually a little bit more laterally away to the side of the body. So you essentially get this lovely diagonal line that kind of runs through. So as I'm creating my masks, I'm going to just bear in mind that diagonal line. So holding Control, essentially we can kind of come across. So I'm going to kind of come up a little bit and then down, just like so. The great thing is with this is it's an iterative process. So you can redo the mask if you're not quite happy with it. So again, I can just Control and drag off the mesh to clear it, and then I can obviously kind of rebuild it. So I'm quite liking that. Again, it's a little bit straighter at the moment, but once we extract it, we can obviously play around with the shapes and the proportions. So with this masked, in my subtool menu, if I come down to extract, you can see I have these options here. So if I press extract, we can see there we get this separate mesh. At the moment it's quite thin, so you may want to play with this thickness slider. You don't really need large numbers here, so just bear that in mind. At the moment it's 0.02. I find, in this case, 0.05 might be, for example, what we end up using. What's important to note is when I hit extract, it's just a preview, so it hasn't actually created a separate subtool yet. So you'll notice if I try and move around, it disappears, right? So if I now change my thickness to, again, 0.05 perhaps, and extract it, again, I quite like the thickness of that, but if I look underneath or try to look around, it disappears, right? Because again, it's just a preview. So you can kind of make sure you're just checking the thickness from all angles first, before you kind of commit to actually accepting your extraction. So you can hit extract, and I'm happy with this. So what I can then do is hit accept. And now you'll notice it kind of creates a new subtool, so we can see that there. What would be good to know is to rename that. So this is going to be our top eyelid. just like so. And important note, when you're extracting subtools, you can see there is a mask. So essentially the extraction subtool gets a mask that kind of essentially inherits the mask from the subtool that we use to create it. So you can see at the moment, if I was to try and say sculpt, I'm only going to be able to sculpt on the bottom, right? The rest of it is protected by the mask. So what I can do in this case is obviously just clear the mask. So we can just hold Control and then clear it. And you can see now we have essentially an eyelid. Again, it's almost like someone's kind of taking some bites out of it. It's kind of uneven. So what we're going to do is obviously try and smooth this up, clean it up, and kind of create something a little bit more in line with what we can see in our reference here. So in order to achieve that, I'm just going to hold down Shift and again, just start to smooth this. One important thing, when you append a new subtool or create a new mesh with the extraction method, symmetry is turned off by default. Which usually is a bit of a pain, but in this case is actually what we want, because again, we don't have a symmetrical eyelid. Obviously, if you were working on both eyes at the same time, you may want to use symmetry to get the base shape, and then turn off symmetry to add in some asymmetrical elements, because again, humans or creatures or whatever you are sculpting usually isn't symmetrical. So we can kind of, again, build up that a little bit more organic variation that you kind of see in nature. For this video, in this tutorial, I'm only focusing on one eye, so I'm not too concerned when it comes to symmetry. So I can hold Shift to get my smooth brush, and I'm just going to kind of smooth the edges, just like so. Cool. And the great thing about why I like this extraction method is, because obviously we're using a sphere to create this mesh, we already have curvature, right? So the idea that our eyelids do curve around our eyeballs, right? So we kind of already get this built in intrinsically with the method that we're doing, which is fantastic. So once I have it, again, relatively cleaned up, obviously at the moment it's not perfect. There is a little bit of unevenness, a bit of wavering that we're going to fix in a moment. But it'd be a good idea to fix it in accordance to the bottom eyelid. So I'm going to go back to my eyeball mesh. So again, you can either click in your subtool stack, or again, you can alt-click the subtool itself, or alternatively as well, you can press N, and then you can select subtools based on names, hence why earlier I recommend naming your subtools. So if you have a lot, you can kind of quickly switch between them based on their name that you give it. If you don't name them, they're all going to be kind of stored under PM3D, which again isn't really helpful to anyone. One cheeky thing about extraction is you'll notice again, if I just hide the top eyelid, so if I just click on the eyeball to hide it, you'll notice that the mask that we used for the top eyelid is still there. So just bear in mind that if I'm trying to use this similar method to create the bottom eyelid, I need to clear the mask first. Otherwise what happens is when I extract it, I'm essentially going to get a top eyelid and a bottom eyelid, because essentially the original mask is never cleared. So I can just hold Control and clear that, and then again I can bring back that top eyelid just to use as a reference for the bottom. So again, I'm going to kind of come from beneath. Again, at the moment, that's particularly not great, because obviously, again, like I said, the lowest point should be more on the lateral side. So again, I can try and create something a bit more like that. So again, that's a little bit nicer. Great thing is I can use the same settings, so I should be able to hit extract. So again, if we hit extract, you can see that we kind of have the same thickness as before. Obviously, we can tweak the eyelids a little bit to kind of get a little bit more accuracy better later on, but I'm happy with this thickness, so I'm going to go ahead and accept it. So now you'll notice again we have a new subtool, which again I'm going to rename to be bottom eyelid. Again, you can see it's still got the mask on there, so just again Control, drag off the mesh to clear it, and then just like before, I'm just going to hold Shift and just do a little bit of smoothing to that shape. So with these kind of proxy meshes or rough placement of the eyelids in, we can now use a move brush to actually start shaping the eyelids more in line with our reference here. Although this reference says about smiling, I'm using specifically the image on the left-hand side, which is essentially the neutral position of the eye. When you're sculpting, generally you want to be sculpting characters or faces in neutral positions and expressions. Because again, part of the process or part of the pipeline is that later we can add expression to the characters, but their kind of default state should be neutral. Think about kind of taking a passport photo. That's kind of what we're aiming for, neutrality. So I'm going to use, again, a move brush here, so BMV, and what's really important is essentially kind of keeping the eyelids quite tight. So again, we can kind of come here and just build up the kind of connection points. And again, just kind of being concerned about maintaining a thickness for the waterline. So often what kind of happens is when people are sculpting the eyelid area, they make the eyelids kind of very, very thin. But if you actually look at eyelids, again, they have quite a bit of mass to them, right? They're definitely kind of got a little bit of form, a little bit of shape. And a really good way of kind of exploring this is this idea of kind of pinchability. So you could pinch eyelids, right? So if you're finding that your eyelids feel like you can't pinch them, then they're probably not thick enough. And then you could use maybe an inflate brush just to add some of that mass back. So essentially we should kind of keep in track that we want kind of consistent thickness around the eyeball. So again, it could be that we just kind of use a move brush just to slightly move these out and kind of create thickness. Again, same from the top. So you can see there, it feels like we can just kind of pull this out a little bit, especially there as well. So essentially we want to kind of keep a consistent waterline. And then again, I can kind of finesse the shape of this top one. So we can use a slightly smaller move brush, because obviously this is a bit more of a, again, big change, big brush, small change, small brush. So obviously the eyelids are quite small, small areas to work on. So I'm trying to do small changes. So again, essentially we can kind of come in here and just start to really shape that eyelid. So again, you can see there, just following my reference. Again, push that up so we kind of get a higher point. Just like so. Again, you can smooth it a little bit just to fix that. Again, it might be that we pull this bit down. So the idea is that we get more of a nice curve, but you can start to see already, even though it's quite, again, a simple mesh in this case, we're kind of starting to get some of that curvature. Same for the bottom. Again, we can kind of, we'll create the tear duct area in a little bit, but if we kind of bring this bit up, again, the idea is that we're trying to create a bit more uniformity here. So again, this area should be the lowest, so we kind of push that down. Cool, and just seeing how it's kind of connecting. Again, looking at our reference. I might push this down a bit. Again, push this up a bit. Again, slightly smaller brush, because we want to affect a smaller area, so we can just kind of tweak that. Again, a bit of smoothing. And again, I can hold Alt and click the top, and then bring this down. So again, that way of kind of jumping between subtools really allows me to kind of really craft the shape that I want to get. So we can kind of see that we're achieving that there. Perfect. Again, as always, check your sculpt from all angles so you can see there's a little bit of unevenness here. Again, this is where I might switch back to perspective. So you can see there, we're kind of getting a flattening at the front. So again, just using our move brush, just to, again, maybe come in here and just, again, give that some curvature. Perhaps this is, again, pushing that back a bit, bringing this section out. So again, we're trying to look for a consistent thickness across. Again, what happens usually is there's, again, another diagonal line in the body, in the sense that the top eyelid usually comes out a bit further than the bottom eyelid. So at the moment you can see it goes the wrong way. So the bottom eyelid is actually coming, protruding a lot more than the top. So there's different ways we can approach this. Also, we could just use kind of a large move brush and push it back and push it forwards. Or alternatively, because they are separate meshes, we can just use the 3D gizmo and just move them. So I've got my top eyelid selected, so I can just press W, and then we can just ever so slightly move this forwards, not too much. Again, we want to make it a subtle change. Then I can Alt-click the bottom eyelid, and then just push that back a bit. Again, it could be that as well, we just bring our eyeball back. Ooh. Again, remember the mask from earlier? So you can see there in my preview of the subtool, I still have the mask, so just Control and drag. So then I can move the entire mesh backwards. So now you can see we're kind of getting more of that, that diagonal line there. Again, in doing so, just check the thickness of our eyelids. So again, just make sure it's kind of appropriately the same thickness throughout. So again, it might be, you can see it gets a bit thin there, so we can just bring that out to kind of keep it consistent. Again, maybe same there as well. check the top eyelid. So now I feel like maybe the top eyelid, again, obviously because we brought it out, we can just tweak the shape a bit. So just ever so slightly push it back. And we can also change the corner of how they meet. So the idea is that we can kind of bring this a little bit further down. Just like so. Again, this is probably where you'll be spending most of your time, just really finessing the shape of the eyelid, because the better accuracy you can get at this stage, just the final result is also going to look a lot better. So don't rush this stage. Again, that's why we're kind of working a lot slower and again, just a lot more methodical. Again, I'm just going to use a move brush just to push. Again, this corner is a little bit too high in order to my reference. So I feel like I want to bring this a little bit lower. So again, usually there's also a diagonal where the inner corner of the eye is a lot lower than the outer corner. So it might be that we kind of use a larger move brush just to bring that back and then bring that one down. Cool. Again, just now, again, check the thickness because that's going too far into the eyeball. Cool, just bring that out a little bit. And there we go. Cool. So I'm happy with the shape of the eyelids at the moment, but we will finesse them a little bit later. But we can now shift our focus back to the kind of surrounding eye area. So if we look at one of our references over here, again, it's important to remember that different people will have different variation in terms of the shapes of the eyelids and the eye area. So kind of one of these areas is this kind of mass that we get on top of the eyelids. And obviously for some, it kind of almost comes over the entire eyelid itself, and for some others, it obviously sits a little bit higher up. And the benefit of doing this as separate subtools is we can just kind of build that mass on top of it, right? So if I come back to my cube here, again, I can use clay buildup or I can use the move brush, but essentially I can start to kind of build up mass, right? So you can see there we can build it up, I can smooth it back. And again, I might want to use my move brush just to essentially bring it onto the surface. So we can essentially start to, again, build up the area on top of the eyelid and around it. So again, we can kind of push it down, pull it out, and we can really, again, finesse the shape that we're trying to achieve. So say I maybe might go for this bottom one, right? But obviously the idea is if it's separate, we can really kind of capture the shapes that we're seeing in these references. So again, the idea that we're going to have this quite close, again, we'll bring it out. Again, we're going to try and keep the resolution of the mesh pretty low, but at some point we may need to step it up. So you can see that we can kind of build this up. Like so. Again, same for the bottom, obviously less for the bottom, but we can still have that build up there. So we can still essentially have this come around and build up. Like so. And again, I might use a move brush to bring this out as well. Again, try and make it nice and kind of round and curved and uniform, if possible. Again, checking it from all angles. Cool. I might use the clay buildup just to, again, because we can see kind of the corner of the eye a little bit more strongly. So essentially I'm just going to use a smaller brush just to kind of carve into that a little bit, just so we kind of don't lose that part of the eyelid there. And again, then the idea is that we can kind of build up around this. Of course, the eye isn't the only thing on the face, and it does interact with other areas. Obviously, we kind of have it going into the nose bridge and obviously down into the cheeks. So although we're just focusing on the eye, just remember that we need to kind of build up those transitionary areas between different facial features. So although we're not necessarily focusing on that today, just bear in mind that obviously when we bring everything together, that there will be some sort of interactivity between features. Cool. So again, just trying to build up a little bit more of a uniform surface here. Cool. I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to shift again back to the eyelid. We'll come back to the eye area a little bit later to again kind of build up some more variation and so forth. But what I can do is kind of just to give ourselves a bit more of this corner shape is again I'm going to use a move brush, and a small move brush. I'm just going to grab the corner. Essentially I'm just going to, again, smaller than that, and I'm just going to drag that out. And then I'm going to alt click the bottom, and again I'm just going to drag that out. So you can sort of see by just doing so, we kind of create this shape. Eventually we're going to merge all these objects together and we can kind of carve in this shape. But for now we can kind of create this shape. And again, I might just pull it down a little bit more there. So you can see that kind of, we're achieving that shape there. Again, we might want to bring this area down again on top a little bit more and kind of align with our reference there. And again, just check that we can keep that nice and round. Lovely. Again, this reference is really nice because you can see the kind of the planes of the eyelid. So the waterline is kind of a really nice flat plane, and obviously from when I smoothed my extraction earlier, it's given it some roundness, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to go and do is using a flatten brush. Essentially, I'm going to flatten the surface and try and make it a nice, strong, sharp plane. So flatten is BFA. You could use trim dynamic or H polish, they kind of do similar things, but in this case I'm just going to use flatten. Again, I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush, and I'm just going to kind of come in and start to flatten this surface. So again, don't worry about trying to do it all in one kind of motion. Obviously, if you did, you could try and use lazy radius to give yourself a bit more of control over a kind of a sweeping motion or a sweeping stroke of your brush. But I'm just going to kind of come in and use some light touches here. But you can see how already that is kind of creating that kind of sharpness to the eyelid. And again, we can do the same for the bottom. So the idea is that from the bottom, we can again use another, again, flatten. So you can start to see how we kind of create this ridge. Just like so. Again. Just like that. Nice. Again, it's still a little bit wavering, so again I might just come back in with a move brush and just ever so slightly push that section down, because again we kind of want it to be nice and uniform in terms of size. So you can see it starts really thick and gets really thin, so it might be that we are going to thin the thick section just by essentially pushing that in. So essentially this kind of plane should be a uniform size. But you can start to see how already just by flattening it, we're really kind of creating that shape there. To go a step further, not only is it great to flatten and create that plane, I'm also going to really essentially pinch the edge to really give it that kind of sharp transition between the planes. And as the name suggests, I'm going to use the pinch brush to achieve this. You could use an inverted dam standard, but again, it's up to you. So B, P, and I for my pinch brush. Again, you only need a very small brush for this. And again, remember that as you're sculpting, especially if you're using a graphics tablet, pressure sensitivity is key. So in this case, it's going to be kind of light touches or light pressure from my pen. So just coming in and just ever so slightly, again, you can see there, it's just sharpening the edge. Just like so. So you can see already how this is kind of creating a really, really nice waterline for our eyelids. Again, if I then just alt click the top, again, I'm just going to do something similar. So you can see there, just coming through and just sharpening that line. Again, just check the kind of thickness of the top one. So there's, again, maybe a little bit of wavering thickness there. So again, just using a move brush just to, again, essentially we want this to be as kind of consistent as possible in terms of thickness. Again, I feel like that section just needs a little bit of touching up. So again, back to my pinch brush, so B, P, and I. I'm just going to come in and just finesse that shape. Okay, and then I'm ever just going to slightly use my move brush just to push this kind of section of the eyelid kind of up a bit. So just to kind of really finesse that curve now, that we can kind of see that. And again, just ever so slightly pull this out. So again, just maintaining that kind of curvature around the eyeball. Sweet, I'm really happy with this so far. So what we can start doing is, again, we can go back to our eye area and we can start building up this mass as well. So again, obviously the idea is that we can come back to it. At the moment, it might be a little bit too low res to, again, kind of carry on achieving our shape. So if I use clay buildup, you can start to see obviously how we're stretching the faces to a point where you can see obviously if I kind of build it up, if I smooth it, we kind of, again, we're essentially resetting itself. So what we can do is essentially get to a point where this essentially just needs to kind of be up-resed a little bit. So I'm going to go to my geometry tab, Dynamesh, and we only slowly increment. So I'm going to go from 32 to 64. So 64, and then when it's already orange, I can then just hold Control and drag, and essentially you can see it's up-resed. So now if I can smooth it, we can see we get a bit more resolution there. And this just allows me to kind of, again, have a bit more control over the shape. So then you can see as I kind of sculpt, we can kind of really start to build up some of the mass and form for these kind of eyelid areas. So again, just kind of looking at this, so the idea that, again, we have a lot more kind of mass on the outer side here, like so. And obviously it kind of comes around there. Again, we want that to be quite a tight line. Eventually we will merge the eyelids, but we're gonna just build this up. And then again, the idea is obviously there is a nose here, but we're going to ignore the nose. Essentially just have this kind of come down and kind of around down there. So essentially we have this mass here. Nice. Again, the bottom, we might not, this again, it might not be as much here, so we can use Alt to just kind of take this away a little bit and kind of have that again, a bit more of a transitionary area. So we can kind of just change this here. And again, just smooth this in. Again, just check it from all angles. So again, it might just need a little bit more kind of uniformity in terms of mass here. Again, I might, again, be careful not to go too thin. So just kind of, again, build back up that orbital fat. Because again, you still have some element of orbital fat around. Again, if we look at this reference, this is again a good, nice kind of reference for transitionary areas. So you can see, again, the mass is kind of coming up from the eyeball, the eyebrow, the brow ridge down, kind of, you know, here. And obviously then it will kind of go backwards. Again, just, there you go. Very nice. And then again, just, I'm going to work on that bottom bit just a tad more. Perfect. So I'm quite happy with this kind of outer region for now. Again, if we take a look at our kind of references here, again, we kind of have that mass going across. Obviously, these references are kind of different eyes and different eye shapes. So again, we don't really want to kind of be merging and creating something new. I'd recommend trying to maybe finding a certain eye shape that you want to have and basing it off of that. But you can see that we're kind of going for that there. And again, I might just want to kind of build in this mass down here a little bit, just a bit more, kind of underneath the eyeball. Okay. Again, you can also use the move brush, so just to again, add a bit more of that kind of curvature. Again, just slightly underneath as well. I'm just going to kind of use this to just kind of curve around. I'm now going to focus back to the eyelids themselves. Because again, they are at the moment two separate meshes, or two separate subtools. So essentially we want to look to bring them together and merge them. So obviously we can kind of sculpt between them. The issue with merging is, again, you have some merge options here. And essentially we want the option is to merge down. So it uses the subtool stack. So the idea that if I select the bottom eyelid, it will merge it with the subtool below it, which in this case is the top eyelid. The issue with that is it's an undoable operation. Thankfully, ZBrush tells us this. So if I hit merge down, you can see we get a big old warning that says, this is not an undoable operation. Are you sure you want to continue? There are ways, if we did do this, if we did merge down, we can split apart the subtools again and carry on working them separately. But what I'm going to recommend is a way of merging in a non-destructive manner. So whenever we're trying to work as best as possible, we want to work in a non-destructive manner. Essentially, this means that we can make changes and iterations quickly and fast, right? The idea is that we're not having to destroy or repeat work. That's the key. So at the moment, if I did just a merge down, essentially I'm bringing these two subtools into one, but then I don't have the option to maybe re-merge in the future if I wanted to make changes to just the bottom eyelid or just the top eyelid. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel that. And the way we can merge non-destructively in ZBrush is the use of folders. So you can see I can create a new folder. In this case, we can just call this eyelids. And you'll notice at the moment we have a number. So at the moment, only the bottom eyelid is stored in that folder. So then I can find the top eyelid and bring that in, and now you'll notice it has 2. And what we can do is, on the cog of the folder, you can see there's lots of different options, but we're looking for merge folder. So essentially that's what it's going to do is it's just going to do a merge down operation with all the subtools in the folder, but it's going to create it as a new mesh for us, rather than essentially overriding the existing subtools. So essentially we can delete the merge if we want to, but we still have all the original subtools to go back and change. So i.e. we're not having to destroy anything in order to do this merge. So now if I merge folder, again you'll notice I get the merged object, but I still have the 2 originals. At the moment they are hidden, because obviously ZBrush kind of suspects that if you're merging something, you don't want to see the originals. But the idea is that we still have them so we can go back to them if needed. Lovely. So now these are merged. If I hit Shift F, you'll essentially notice I can see the wireframe for both of them. But it's still a little bit tricky to sculpt between them. So you'll notice, again, just for example, if I shift, you can see they're actually still separate. So they're not what we call welded, they're not together. So in this case, again, it might be that I want to kind of sculpt in these shapes here, and I want to basically build up between the 2 objects. So once you've kind of merged them, you want to weld them together. And the way we can weld things is using Dynamesh. So if I go to my Geometry tab, I'm going to use Dynamesh in this case. We can try and find a suitable resolution. So if I do maybe 32. So you can notice 32 is too low, right? We're losing all of that lovely shape and form that we did because obviously the mesh resolution is just too low. So thankfully we can undo that. It might be 128. I'm going to leave it at 128. So you can see there, it's now merged. So the idea is that I can kind of come in here and essentially I can, with a smaller brush, essentially I can just smooth out these kind of areas, just like so. And then I can maybe use my clay build-up brush just to ever so, again, small brush, because obviously it's a small change, small brush. So I can hold Alt and just really kind of carve in, you know, this kind of shape here. And then again, just smooth that back. Yeah, just kind of really get that. Something like that. So you can start to see how we're kind of getting that there. Again, just going to try and make it a little bit more rounder. So just kind of using my brush there to round off that section. Cool, I'm quite happy with that. Again, we can work on this other kind of transition area. So just making sure that, again, we're just smoothing those. And it might be that if you want to kind of emphasize the plane changes, as you can see in our reference, we can use kind of the dam standard just to kind of, again, come in and highlight those plane changes a little bit. Something like that. Cool. So now we have our merged eyelid, we have our eyeball and we have our face. Again, I can come back to the face because now obviously I've merged these. We may want to make some changes here. So I'm going to use the move brush just to kind of play around with this shape. So the idea that we can kind of maybe push this up, push this out a bit, again, maybe push this down. So again, if we take a look at our kind of reference here, so the idea of obviously maybe this needs to be slightly higher if we're going for this kind of reference, the idea that we can kind of push that up, kind of bring the mass up a bit like so, and then again bring this closer. So we're seeing more of the eyelid here, and we can push that back. Again, I can use the clay build-up to kind of actually carve into this. So using Alt, you can kind of really kind of get the shape of the eyelid. And obviously they're still separate at the moment, so we can really kind of build this up. So again, I'm going to kind of just come down, use a slightly bigger brush here. And you can essentially just building this kind of mass in there. And again, you can hold Alt to obviously essentially create that kind of pocket. just like so. And again, just smooth all this back. Again, slightly maybe build up that area just a tad. Just like so. Cool, again, just check it from all angles. So again, that might be a bit too much that side. So again, you can use the move brush just to maybe push that back a little bit. Again, think about curvature, think about mass, think about pinchability, think about all those things that we've kind of discussed earlier. But we're kind of getting something quite nice. I might again just ever so slightly bring this a little bit closer. Again, we can really finesse the shape here. I don't want to lose that corner too much. So again, just maybe make sure that we're not losing that shape a bit too much. Like so. Again, I think maybe the actual eyelid we can kind of bring down a bit. Again, I don't want to do too much changing of the eyelid shape now. I would have done it earlier, but again, you can think about how the iris sits. So again, if we're thinking of the middle of the sphere or the eyeball being kind of where the iris is, so you can see that there. So maybe that, again, the bottom eyelid's pretty good, it hugs it, but maybe the top eyelid's too high. Because again, if we can imagine the iris is about kind of, say, this size of my brush, you can see that we're going to have a bit more of the sclera or the white of the eye showing. So we may want to bring that down a bit. Obviously, doing that when it's separate is going to be a lot easier, but I think, as I mentioned before, the idea that sculpting, you're always making tweaks, always making forever changes. Again, a lot of sculpting is just really good observational work of obviously looking at references, looking at real life, and kind of trying to recreate it. So again, it's just practice. So the idea is that if we kind of, again, use quite a big move brush. Again, you can obviously mask the bottom region, the bottom eyelid. So obviously the idea is that we can obviously mask this to protect that part. So obviously as we change the top, we're not necessarily changing too much in the bottom. Again, just be cautious about, again, thickness again. And it could be that then you push this down as well. Okay. Again, just you can see it gets the thickness of the top eyelid kind of does waver a little bit. So again, I'm just going to quite quickly fix that. Again, I can clear the mask ever so slightly, small brush, just to kind of give it. Again, it's a little bit too straight, too linear there. Again, the eyelids do have a kind of a natural curvature to them. So again, ever so slightly, just lift that up. So again, you can start to see we're kind of building in again. Curves. Maybe just there as well. Okay. Again, maybe just lower that bottom lid a little bit. Again, just gonna make some tweaks down there. There you go. Cool. So what we can look to do now is actually merge these eyelids back, because unfortunately, unlike your eyeball, your eyelids are part of your skin, right? They are part of the same thing. So we do want to kind of build up between them, right? But again, the reason why we've done it this way is it gives us more control over the shape, because again, the eyelid is quite a complex area. So just like before, again, I'm going to be making use of a folder to work non-destructively. So I can create a new folder. Again, we can call this eye area. So you give it whatever name is appropriate. So put the face in there and the merged eyeball. And again, cog, merge folder. So now again, you can see there, we have our kind of two folders and again, our eyeball and then our merged asset. So again, if we look at the wireframe, we can see that together. So even though they're merged at the moment, they're not welded. Again, we'll have to use Dynamesh in order to do that. But just to show you, what you can do is still manipulate these meshes separately, even though they are technically one subtool. So you'll notice at the moment, if I just use my move brush, I'm going to move the entire mesh because again, it's one subtool. But what you can do is if you make use of a different move brush, which we call the move topological brush. So BMT. You'll notice now, essentially what I can do is I can still move them separately because it's moving essentially the different subtools or the different areas of topology. So you can notice that essentially I can move these independently of each other, even though they are one subtool, which is again a nice kind of helpful way of working. So again, if I wanted to maybe make a slight change to this shape down here, again, I can just kind of do so, just like that. Perfect. We have a high level of mesh resolution at the moment, or lots of detail. So when we Dynamesh to weld them, we want to make sure that we don't lose that, right? So we might find that we have to use a slightly higher number. So in this case, 128 should do the trick. So if I hit Dynamesh, you can see that they are now welded. Obviously, we kind of have to work on these transitionary areas. So I can come in with a smooth brush. And again, just ever so, again, lots of light pressure here. Essentially, I'm just going to smooth these transitions. Again, you might want to build up mass between that. So we can kind of work on that in just a moment. But again, just coming, especially with the top eyelid, we don't want to lose that kind of fold because again, we do have that kind of strong, sharp fold. So we don't want to kind of lose that. And obviously just bear in mind the radius of your brush, we don't want to affect what we kind of have for the eyelids already. So again, we're just going to come through and just kind of smooth those areas. Again, you might want to build up mass in here, essentially kind of smooth this into the area there. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. And now we can start to kind of bring everything together. So I can kind of use my clay build-up brush to kind of just start to build up this kind of mass on the end of the eyelid there. So we can start to build that corner of the eyeball. Again, I might want to kind of build up some mass surrounding it. So the idea that this kind of, starts to come into something, we can, again, slightly smaller brush just to start highlighting that. So we get that corner. Again, you could use maybe Dam Standard to kind of just ever so slightly highlight that, and then again, just make sure you're smoothing that back a little bit. Again, the bottom eyelid kind of doesn't really have like a distinct end, really. It kind of flows quite nicely, gradually into the rest of the head. So I might want to kind of build up mass between these areas. So essentially using clay build-up, we can just start to kind of build into this area. And obviously now, because they're merged, we can kind of start to do so. So again, just make sure we don't smooth too much and lose our kind of original shapes, of course. But we can start to just, again, build this in. Slightly smaller brush, again, just like so. Again, I think maybe inflate would be good. So just to kind of give it a bit more kind of mass, and again, a bit more uniformity. So again, just smoothing that. So it's kind of one gradual shift. And then I might, again, just push that mass all the way back. So again, just kind of pushing that, maybe slightly bigger with brush. Just pushing that. Again, you might want to, you may want to just make sure I'm using the mask lasso or the mask pen. Essentially, I'm just going to protect my kind of waterline of the bottom eyelid a little bit more. Cool. So then as I push this back, again, I'm not kind of changing that as much as I can. So again, just going to kind of push this a little bit further back. Again, still trying to have a bit around this, but again, just thinking about the shape there. Again, I might just slightly clean up this area. So again, if we take a look at our kind of reference here, again, we can see there's kind of a bit more of a depression here. So the idea is that we can kind of, again, using a slightly bigger brush, just kind of create that. So then we kind of give that kind of shape. Again, just move that back. Again, I might just try and, again, just tidy up that bottom shape. Again, keep it some roundness. So you can see these are just the kind of finishing touches, essentially. again, I'm just going to kind of bring that top eyelid down into this section. And again, I might then use the Sam Standard just to kind of create some of these, again, kind of wrinkles a little bit. We're not going to worry too much about wrinkles. Those are more tertiary details. Again, in this kind of tutorial, we're definitely more interested in the primary forms and maybe some of the secondary forms. But obviously we could go a lot further and kind of start to create these kind of finer, smaller wrinkles kind of later on. So I'm just going to just soften some of our transitions up here a little bit. Again, just work on some curvature, so some final finishing touches. Just like so. Again, as you do this, just make sure that we don't change the thickness of the waterline. Again, we might just want to, again, I'm just going to mask this section. So obviously, some of the changes I'm doing now, maybe I should have probably, again, done a little bit earlier, just because essentially what I want to do is just try and maybe bring this a little bit closer. But we have that there. So again, then the idea is that maybe I'll come in with just a dam standard, just to kind of pinch that line. Cool. I'm just going to tidy up this little area down here, just again to give it a bit more mass. And then again, just make sure we don't lose that corner shape. Obviously I'm going for a bit more round. You can see it's a bit more pointed in this reference, but again, different eyes. So again, do this tutorial in different ways. Maybe do different methods, maybe do different eyes. Again, find what works for you, right? Again, you may want to just sculpt the eyelids directly rather than using the extraction method, but again, that's perfectly fine. There is no right way to sculpt. Cool. And I'm just going to tidy up that section a little bit. All right. There we go. So the final step, again, just purely for a presentation point of view, is we can kind of just kind of simplify our cube. So making sure we're in orthographic, I can use Control and Shift and use my knife curve, and I can essentially slice off the back. Just be careful, obviously, because of the sphere, so you might need to slice off less than you think. Great thing is you can hold space while you do this, and you can just move it around. So essentially I can just bring it about there, maybe. And essentially now you can see that. I'm not going to slice too much off the, essentially I'm not going to slice the corners, mainly because we have lots of the eye kind of going around there, but we have that there. So that's how we can take a few simple subtools, merge them and sculpt on them in a non-destructive manner to create a more complex area such as the eye. If you found this video tutorial helpful, be sure to check out some of our other videos in the facial sculpting series, such as sculpting lips, the nose, the ears, and bringing all of the facial features, including the eyes, together to sculpt a final head. But for now, see you soon and carry on sculpting.